Number 7. The Ancestral Step. Monster Hunter 4 introduced a lot of new options for players and monsters to utilize in combat. Players could now lunge off ledges to do jumping attacks in an attempt to knock their targets down for huge amounts of damage. Maps were given separate elevation levels and more climbable surfaces. Monsters could use vines and webbing to get around, and there were more destructible elements added to several battle zones. These features served to add an additional layer of dynamism to the combat of Monster Hunter. You weren't fighting monsters in flat circles and boxes anymore. The third dimension of space was now incredibly important, arguably even more so than with underwater combat in Tri. Your awareness of your surroundings matters far more when you can actually interact with objects in this additional third dimension. So Monster Hunter 4 had the challenge of making these new mechanics feel potent and consistent right from the jump, and I'd like to think that it did so pretty magnificently. Let's talk about the combat stuff first. You're almost never going to be fighting in Area 1, and Area 3 isn't used a ton either, admittedly, so you can either go straight to Area 2 or continue through 3 and into Area 8. Area 8 has this triple layer battle zone with a pretty simple and sizable box arena right in the middle right of the map. This pit is surrounded by a second shelf layer that allows for easy jumping attacks in a whole kind of circle around it, and a third layer is placed above the second. Each of these layers are large enough to fight on, and it becomes this game of trying to bait the monster onto the lower shelves so you can hack at it with mounting attacks. Area 2, on the other hand, is pretty spacious with a couple of ledges you can hop on, but its main feature is a second floor suspended over the first one. Not only can you use vines and a staircase towards the back of the map to climb up onto the second floor, but also the monsters can use the vines that make up this second level to swing around and attack you from overhead if you're on the ground, or attack you from under your feet if you're up on that second floor. You can even knock monsters through the vines and send them crashing down to the ground below if you get a solid knockdown on them. Pretty quickly, the Ancestral Step gives you two areas with different types of verticality that encourage strategy and outmaneuvering the monster, while also giving the beasts the ability to use these tools to their advantage as well. I think these two early zones are perfectly set up and positioned to introduce you to how Monster Hunter 4 works. And there's absolutely more to talk about in terms of combat. Area 4 of the Ancestral Step is one of my favorite battle zones in Monster Hunter, period. It's got tons of little ledges and hills and ramps to make the verticality constantly shift and change. It's got this little river if you have to deal with fire blight. It's got this destroyable bridge on top of these big rock piles. That's kind of cool to try and bait the monster into smashing that apart. The bridge can be used for jumping attacks into this little valley down below it. I love fighting flying enemies here and trying to trick them by putting them into positions where I'm above them and getting mounting attacks off of them. It can be super cool to also fight in Area 7, which is this giant, massive, 3-tiered cliff face that you gotta climb up. Each platform on this cliff face is big enough to be its own arena, and there's this constant threat of being thrown down a level by the monster as you're battling with it. Area 9 is pretty similar to 2, but its second floor is raised even higher. There's a couple of jumpable gaps on that second floor that you can hop between, and there's a few rock pillars that the monsters can smash into and break apart. Then you got Area 5, which looks like a very typical flying wyvern nest, but it's got a cool twist to it where attacks from monsters like Rathalos can knock the nest off kilter and make you lose your balance. When the Ancestral Step wants to play around with its verticality mechanics, it really plays with them and seems to have a blast doing it. There's a lot of great variety here, and the ingenuity built into these zones can make for some exceptional battles. There are a few zones here that are a little bit less creative, which is absolutely fine, but they're also a little bit underused in terms of the monsters going to them as well. Area 3 only really has one little ledge that's tucked off towards the back, and monsters very rarely go there. Area 1 is pretty much just an introduction zone. If you can fight anything there, I have no memory of it. And Area 6 is another zone that is used pretty sparingly. It's fine enough. It's a little area with the two ledges over a water pool that you can attack from. That's fine. The vast majority of the fighting I have done and can clearly remember in both Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate and Generations Ultimate is in areas 2, 4, 7, and 8. 9 and 5 also get some decent usage too because they're nests, but that's typically during the battle's final minutes. There's a solid percentage of this map that gets some attention, but would absolutely stand to benefit if it received more. I would not be shocked if the developers knew which zones were overtly the more interesting and complex ones and coded the monsters to stick more around that select group. It can at least feel that way. The best of the combat in the Ancestral Step is phenomenal, but there's certainly some preferential treatment here and there. The other thing I find phenomenal about the Ancestral Step is its art and aesthetics in some areas. I adore the autumnal palette mixed with the huge cliffs of redstone and a wild yellow grassland that this map features. Again, dude, Area 4, it's got these huge red rock structures both on the map and looming out in the background, and then you just have this enormous canopy of gorgeous red leaves covering most of the zone, and then the sunlight comes pouring in through the tree leaves and turns golden in the process. Areas 1 and 3 might not be used very much, but I do love just looking out at the sea of long golden savanna grass that they both use in their zones and in their backgrounds. Unfortunately, the map starts to abandon these gorgeous colors the more you start to climb up the mountain. I guess that makes sense, but some of these lower levels of the step are so gorgeous and really different from any other Forest and Hills-like type of map that Monster Hunter has to offer, and I wish that that was more consistent across the board. I would like if that redstone and the deciduous trees retained at least some level of prominence throughout the entire map. The music's also pretty strong, it's big and it's brassy, and has this big sense of bombast and heroism and battle to it. It's not the most intense or adrenaline-pumping music track, though it does have some quieter sections that lean a bit more in that direction. The strongest emotion I get from this piece is triumph, and I think it works excellently as an opening battle track for Monster Hunter 4, which also loves using a lot of enormous heroic brass in its main theme. I have no issues or particularly strong opinions regarding map traversal or monster roster. The monsters here slot in nicely for a woodsy map with a lot of hills and mountains. There's plenty of monkey monsters to swing around in the vines, there's flying and bird wyverns to properly utilize the cliffs, and large predators to use the more broad grassland areas. And it's a pretty meaty roster with beasts at just about every tier of difficulty. No elder dragons though, oddly enough. And moving around this map isn't too much of a hassle at all. The worst there is probably getting up to Area 5, which can be a little bit of a pain in the ass, because most of the regions that lead up to that nest have a lot of climbing involved, but that's really kind of the only annoying part about maneuvering this location. The highs of the Ancestral Step are enormously high, but the outstanding aspects are just a little bit inconsistent. A number of zones don't get used enough, and there are plenty of areas that get more unique treatment from the art department. There's next to nothing here that's actually bad, just a noticeable chunk that's kinda average and a little underserved. At its absolute best though, some of the greatest views and combat that Monster Hunter has to offer can be found here.